He was a brilliant doctor, respected for his talent but feared for his coldness. As he walked through the crowded hallway of the public wing, a woman grabbed his arm. "Doctor, please, help me." He didn't even hesitate. "I don't treat patients in the public wing," and he kept walking and without looking back. But what he didn't know was that this woman was holding in her hands the only chance to save a life, his son's life, and he was about to find out, in the worst possible way. Chicago. 7 in the morning, late November, the kind of cold that gets into your bones before you've even made it in from the parking garage. The hallway at Lakeside General was packed. White coats, gurneys, families who hadn't slept in days. Dr. Alexander Reed cut through the crowd, 38 years old, a cardiovascular surgeon. Fast steps, eyes locked forward, like nothing else existed. A young resident tried to stop him. "Dr. Reed, sorry, do you have a second to look at?" "Not now." He didn't even slow down. The resident had learned by now not to expect anything else. Alexander hadn't always been like this. 2 weeks ago, everything changed. His son Ethan, 8 years old, went into severe kidney failure. Dialysis machines, blood tests, nights sitting by a hospital bed, watching a tube keep alive the boy he'd carried into the world the same day he lost his wife. Marcus had found him outside the ICU one of those nights, staring at nothing. "Hey," Marcus said, sitting down next to him. "Talk to me. What's the panel say?" "They ran the compatibility test," Alexander said, voice flat. "I'm out. The autoimmune thing. I can't donate." "Alex, don't." He rubbed his eyes. "I spent 15 years learning how to save people, and I can't save my own kid." Marcus didn't have anything to fix that. He just stayed. A father who couldn't save his son. A doctor who couldn't fix himself. In a matter of days, it turned Alexander into someone else. Quieter, harder, colder. His colleagues noticed. Even Marcus had gotten more than one short answer lately, when all he did was ask how Alexander was holding up. That morning, cutting through the public wing on his way to the private floor, where he saw his paying patients, same building, 1 floor up, he felt someone grab his sleeve. A woman, thin, pale, hair falling out of a loose braid, lips cracked from dehydration. But her eyes, there was something in them that didn't match how weak she looked. "Doctor, please, help me." Alexander looked at her for less than a second. Any other day he might have stopped, might have asked what was wrong. But right now, with Ethan on his mind, 2 weeks without real sleep, his chest in a knot, there wasn't room for anything else. "I don't treat patients in the public wing. The private clinic's next door." He kept walking. The woman, too weak to hold herself up, slid down to the floor, her hand still reaching toward where he used to be. 2 nurses walked past, busy, distracted. One of them muttered something about paging someone and kept going. In a public hospital, on an ordinary day, a woman on the floor wasn't news. Alexander didn't turn around, not because he hadn't heard her, because right now his entire world came down to one thing: get there in time, see his son before his shift started. A man came running toward him as he entered the private wing, barely catching his breath. Dr. Marcus Hale, his friend since college, head of the transplant program. "Alex," he said, out of breath, "Ethan's surgery is done." It worked. For a second, Alexander's whole world stopped. "It worked," he repeated, like he didn't trust his own ears. "They found a donor. Anonymous," Marcus said. "Came in overnight. Near perfect match. The kidney's already functioning. Your son's gonna live, Alex." His legs that had held steady through 8-hour surgeries, shook for the first time in a long while. He ran, actually ran, down the hall to recovery. Ethan was asleep, color coming back to his cheeks. Alexander stood there, watching his son's chest rise and fall, something he hadn't been able to watch without fear in weeks. "Thank you," he whispered, not sure who he was talking to. The next morning, Ethan woke up smiling. "Dad, it doesn't hurt anymore." Alexander squeezed his hand, fighting back tears he couldn't quite hold. "It's never going to hurt again, buddy." But even with the relief, one question wouldn't leave him alone. Who saved his son? He found Marcus in his office that same afternoon. "I need to meet the donor," he said, straight to the point, "or their family. I need to say thank you." Marcus looked at him carefully. "You know that's against protocol, Alex. Anonymous donors stay anonymous for a reason. If I make an exception, even for you, I could lose my job." "Marcus," Alexander pushed, his voice cracking in a way it rarely did. "That's my son. I need to see them. I need to know who I owe his life to." A long silence. Marcus thought it over, hesitated, then sighed. "Fine, but only because it's you. And only for a minute. Nobody else finds out. They walked the halls together, and Alexander noticed with a strange feeling that they were heading toward the public wing. He figured it was just a shortcut. Marcus stopped in front of a door. Room 214, public wing. This is it. Alexander pushed the door open, feeling something close to gratitude and curiosity he hadn't felt in a long time, and then he saw her. In the bed, pale, an IV in her arm, was the same woman he'd left on the floor 2 days ago. The air went out of his lungs. She recognized him instantly. Tired eyes, but steady. No anger in them. It took Alexander a few seconds to find his voice. "Good morning," he said finally, forcing warmth he didn't fully feel, ashamed down to his bones. "How are you feeling?" "I've been better," she said, voice weak. "But I'm okay now, doctor." Alexander stepped closer and, without thinking, took her hand. "I know you're going through something incredibly hard," he said, voice breaking, "and I'm so sorry for your loss. But you just saved the life of a boy the same age as your son, and he's doing great." Her eyes closed. Tears slid down her face, quiet, no sobbing, like someone who'd been crying like this for a long time already. Alexander couldn't believe it. The same woman he'd turned away, left on the floor without even looking back, had just saved his son's life. Marcus, from the doorway, finally spoke, his own voice tight. "This is Dr. Alexander Reed," he told her. "You saved his son's life. He wanted to meet you, to say thank you." Alexander couldn't get a word out. Something was stuck in his throat. Shame, probably. Shame at having looked down on the same woman who, without knowing it, had just saved the most important thing in his life. He stepped closer, searching for the right words. But she spoke first. "You don't have to thank me," she said, with a calm that disarmed him completely. "Everyone gives what they have in their heart. I couldn't save my son, but I know he's happy, knowing I could give another kid a second chance." Alexander lowered his head. Her tear, the first he'd let fall in front of someone in years, rolled down his face. "We'll let you rest," he said, barely audible. They left the room, but at the door Alexander turned around one more time, toward the face of that woman, the same one he'd refused 2 days ago, the one he'd walked past without looking back. This time, he couldn't look away. The next few days felt strange for Alexander. On the outside, he was the same demanding surgeon everyone knew. On the inside, something had cracked, and at the same time something was starting to build. He couldn't stop thinking about her. He tracked down the hospital social worker, a woman named Diane Foster, who'd handled cases in the public wing for almost 20 years. "Her name's Grace Bennett," Diane said, pulling up the file. 30 years old, single mum, cleaned houses, sold tamales on weekends to make ends meet for her son. "The boy's father?" Alexander asked. "Took off the second he found out she was pregnant," Diane said flatly. "Said he was going up north for work. Never heard from him again. Grace did everything on her own." Before Diane could go on, Alexander's phone buzzed. A message from the babysitter. Ethan wanted to know for the 3rd time that day when he could meet the woman who saved his life. Alexander stopped by that afternoon, even for a few minutes between shifts. "Dad, when do I get to meet her?" Ethan asked, still wearing his hospital bracelet. "I want to say thank you myself." "Soon, buddy," Alexander said, not knowing yet how much he was about to learn. "I promise." The next day he went back to Diane to hear the rest. His name was Lucas, Diane said. 8 years old, same kidney disease as Ethan. And nobody caught it in time. Caught it too late. Grace offered to donate the second she found out, but her own kidneys were already shot. Years of hard labor, never enough money for a real checkup. She didn't qualify. Alexander sat with that for a second. "So when he passed, 3 weeks ago," Diane said, "she authorized organ donation. One of them went to your son, doctor." Alexander went quiet. 3 weeks. That boy had died just 3 weeks before his own son got the kidney that saved his life. "How's she doing now?" "Weak," Diane said. "Picked up an infection in here that's slowing her recovery. And honestly, doctor, she has no one. No family close by. No partner. No savings. She rents a room behind a neighbor's house, and I don't even know if she can keep paying for it while she recovers." That night, Alexander drove out to Grace's neighborhood, telling no one, just wanting to understand a little more about the life she'd lived. He found the street easily enough. A block on the south side, small brick 2 flats packed close together, laundry lines strung between back porches, a couple of kids kicking a half-flat soccer ball under the flicker of a streetlight that hadn't worked right in years. A neighbor, an older woman everyone just called Miss Loretta, sized him up with suspicion. "And who are you?" she asked, arms crossed. "I'm a doctor from the hospital," Alexander said. "I'm looking for Grace Bennett." Loretta looked him over, noting the expensive watch, the car parked at the curb. "That woman worked harder than anybody on this block," she finally said, voice hard. "Took care of her boy alone, day and night, right up to the end, and when he passed, she didn't even have enough for a full service." We all chipped in. Every word landed on Alexander like a stone. "What do you want with her?" Loretta pressed, still wary. "I want to help her," Alexander said, honestly. "I owe her my son's life." Loretta studied him a moment longer, something in her expression softening just slightly. "Then help her for real," she said. "Not out of pity. That woman doesn't need pity. She needs someone to treat her like she deserves." That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the silence of his house, a silence that used to feel comfortable, pressing down on him now. He thought about Lucas, an 8-year-old boy dying in a hospital bed, while his mother, with nothing, no one beside her, still found the strength to think of another child she'd never even met. He thought about himself, walking past her, not looking back. The next day, when Ethan got discharged, fully recovered, running down the hallway like he'd never been sick, Alexander went to see Grace again. She looked weaker than before, pale, exhausted, but that same dignity that never seemed to leave her. "Ms. Bennett," he said gently, "I want to help you, whatever you need." Grace looked at him steadily. No hostility, but no easy gratitude either. "Dr. Reed," she said, calm in a way that hit harder than anger would have. "I don't want anybody's pity. When I asked you for help, you said no. Don't feel guilty about that. That's just who you are. And I've met plenty of people like you, people who think that because we're poor, we don't have dignity." The words landed hard. He said nothing. He couldn't, because she was right. "And another thing," she continued, voice softer but still firm, "I don't need anyone clearing their conscience with me, doctor. I made my decision about my son's organs for Lucas. Not for you, not for your son, not so you'd feel better." Alexander nodded, swallowing hard. "You're right," he said finally. "And that's not why I came. I came because I want to help you. No other reason, though I understand if you don't believe me." He left that afternoon with a heavier chest than before, but also with something new. He knew he'd been wrong, and he was determined to earn her forgiveness. Not demand it, earn it, by showing her through actions that he wasn't the man his coldness had made him look like that day. The day Grace was finally discharged, Alexander and Ethan were waiting outside the hospital. When the boy saw her come out, walking slowly with a borrowed cane, he ran straight to her and threw his arms around her. "Thank you for saving my life," he said, with that blunt honesty only kids have. Grace, caught off guard, hugged him back, tears in her eyes. Alexander stepped closer. "Miss Bennett," he said, "I know you don't have anyone to lean on. You shouldn't be alone right now, especially not while you're covering rent you might not be able to afford. Please let me do this for you. It's the least I can do." Grace shook her head. "That's not necessary, doctor." "I already told you." Ethan, still holding on to her, cut in. "Please," the boy said, eyes pleading, "I want you to stay with us. Just for a while." Grace looked down at him, and for 1 second, just one, she saw the same spark Lucas used to have before he got sick. That same light in the eyes she thought she'd never see again. Overwhelmed, unable to hold back tears, she finally nodded. "Okay," she said quietly, "just until I'm fully back on my feet." The first few weeks in Alexander's house were awkward for everyone. Grace felt out of place, like an intruder in someone else's home, surrounded by furniture nicer than anything she'd ever owned, in a kitchen bigger than the whole room she used to rent. Alexander didn't know how to act either. Caught between wanting to help and not wanting to come off as condescending, he ended up talking to her with a stiff formality, like she was still a patient and not someone sleeping under his roof. And Ethan, oblivious to all the adult tension, just loved having someone new around who told him bedtime stories, helped with homework, and laughed at his bad jokes with more patience than his dad, worn out from hospital shifts, could usually manage. 2 weeks after discharge, Ethan had his first follow-up. The results weren't fully clear. One blood value slightly off, enough to set off every alarm bell in Alexander's head as a doctor, way beyond what any regular parent would even notice. "Could just be the body adjusting to the new kidney," Marcus told him, going over the results. "But let's run it again in 2 weeks, just to be safe." 2 weeks that felt like an eternity to Alexander. Every normal kid symptom, tired after playing, skipped a meal, headache from the heat, turned in his head into a possible sign of rejection. Grace was the one who noticed. "You're going to make yourself sick too, worrying like this," she told him one night, finding him wide awake reading the same lab results for the third time. "Ethan's fine. Trust it a little." "I can't help it," he said, voice tired. "I already lost something once that I couldn't get back. I don't know if I could survive that again." Grace sat down next to him, and for the first time, she was the one holding his hand. "Then we're not going to lose him," she said with quiet conviction. "I won't let that happen either." Meanwhile, word started spreading around the hospital. A nurse saw Alexander leave his shift to bring Grace food, and by the end of the week, the story had made its way through the whole private wing. "He's spending money on some woman from the public wing," one colleague murmured in the break room, not realizing Alexander was standing right outside the door. "Weird coming from someone so uptight about everything." "Heard he even moved her into his house," another doctor added, laughing quietly. Dr. Reed, the coldest guy in the hospital, playing charity case. Even the hospital administrator, a man named Whitfield, called Alexander into his office one afternoon. "Alex," he said, careful but clearly uncomfortable, "I've been getting some comments. I know it's a sensitive situation, but I need you to keep things a little more discreet." The hospital's image, Alexander cut in with a calm that surprised even Whitfield, is built by treating people right, not by hiding who we help. If that bothers someone, that's their problem, not mine. Whitfield never brought it up again. That night, driving home, Alexander felt something he wasn't expecting. Not shame, just quiet certainty that for the first time in a long time, he didn't care what people thought of him. That same week, Ethan's new results finally came back. The value had gone back to normal, exactly like Marcus predicted. Just a temporary adjustment. Alexander felt, for the first time in weeks, like he could breathe again. "Told you," Grace said, smiling softly as she watched him hang up with Marcus. "Trust a little more, doctor." Alexander pulled her into a hug, not saying anything, just grateful to have someone to share both the fear and the relief with. There were nights Grace woke up feverish, weak from the infection that still hadn't fully cleared. On those nights, Alexander was the one who got up, who made chicken soup with the same care he brought to the operating room, who helped her walk to the bathroom when the nausea hit, who carried her back to bed when her legs gave out. "You don't have to do this," she said one of those nights, embarrassed by her own weakness. "Yes, I do," Alexander said, steady, "and I want to." One night, the fever spiked and Grace started shaking uncontrollably. Alexander, a light sleeper after years of hospital shifts, was at her side in seconds, wet towels and thermometer in hand. 103, he said, frowning at the reading. "Let's get this down. You're going to be okay, I'm right here." He pressed the towels to her forehead, her neck, her wrists, talking low the whole time, the same way he'd calm a scared patient in the ER. "You'd make a good nurse," Grace murmured, half asleep, half delirious with fever. "And you'd make a good surgeon," he said, still tending to her. "Toughest patient I've ever had." By morning, the fever had broken, and Alexander, exhausted, fell asleep sitting beside the bed, still holding her hand. Little by little, between bowls of soup and fever nights, they started really getting to know each other. "Ethan's mom died having him," Alexander told her one night, not looking up from the dishes he was drying. "I raised him alone ever since. 12-hour shifts, homework at midnight. Never let myself get close to anyone again. Until you." Grace didn't say anything right away. She just let him keep talking. "I think that's part of why I was such a wreck that day in the hallway," he admitted. "I've spent 8 years terrified of not being enough for him, and that day, I felt it more than ever." "You don't get to use that as an excuse," Grace said, but gently. "But I get it." "What about you?" Annie asked. "Lucas's dad. Left the day he found out I was pregnant," she said, no bitterness left in her voice, just fact. "I cleaned houses during the day, sold tamales on weekends. Lucas used to do his homework on a cardboard box next to my stand. I kept a jar for his college fund. It's still empty. I never had the heart to throw it out." "Lucas wanted to play soccer professionally," she told him one afternoon, folding laundry, her hands steadier now. "Said he was going to play for a big team, buy me a new house with a yard." Alexander smiled, a tenderness he rarely showed. "Ethan's obsessed with soccer too," he said. "They would have gotten along." "They really would have," Grace said, a sad but genuine smile crossing her face. "Probably would have started their own team. Lucas always said he needed a best friend who could actually score." They both laughed, partly at the image, partly at the relief of talking about their sons without it hurting so much. One Sunday afternoon, Ethan asked Grace to play soccer with him in the backyard. She hesitated at first, still unsure of her own strength, but ended up kicking off her shoes and standing across from him, ready to try. Ethan kicked the ball as hard as he could, and Grace burst out laughing as it rolled clumsily into a flower pot. "Lucas kicked worse than you," she said, laughing, then quickly covering her mouth, surprised at how naturally his name had come out, no crack in her voice. Ethan laughed too. "Then I could have beaten him," he said, proud, chasing after the ball again. That afternoon, for the first time since her son died, Grace played, laughed, and for one brief moment, let herself just be present. No guilt, no pain, just sunshine, and the laughter of a boy who wasn't hers, but was starting to feel like it. As the weeks went on, Grace insisted on not relying only on Alexander. She started helping around the house, cooking, and eventually, once she felt stronger, picked up a part-time morning job at a local stationery shop, something that gave her back a sense of independence she badly needed. "I don't want you thinking I'm here just because I have nowhere else to go," she told Alexander one night, counting out her first paycheck on the kitchen table. "Never thought that," he said. "I'm glad to see you like this. That strength in you." But things weren't calm the whole time. One afternoon, Grace overheard a phone call between Alexander and Margaret, his late wife's mother. "I don't know what you're doing, Alexander," the woman said, her tone sharp even through the phone. "Bringing that woman to live in your house with Ethan there. What are people going to think? What's Ethan going to think when he's older and understands all this?" Alexander answered firmly, but Grace didn't stick around to hear the rest. She stood in the kitchen, hands shaking, feeling like maybe she really was a burden after all. A problem. A poor woman who didn't belong in that house, in that family, in that life. A few days later, Margaret showed up at the house unannounced, using a visit with her grandson as an excuse. She found Grace folding laundry in the living room and looked her up and down without any attempt to hide it. "So you're the woman everyone's talking about," she said, in a tone that left no doubt what she thought. "I'm Grace," she said calmly, extending her hand, which Margaret didn't take. "My daughter died bringing that boy into this world," Margaret said, blunt. "I won't let just anyone take her place in this house." Grace felt the sting of those words, but didn't look away. "I'm not here to take anyone's place, Ma'am," she said steady. "I lost my son too. I know what it's like to carry a hole nothing can fill. I'm not here to replace anybody. I'm here because your grandson asked me to be, and because your son-in-law treated me with respect when I needed it most." Margaret didn't have an answer for that. That night, Grace could barely eat. She sat there, moving food around her plate, while Alexander, not yet knowing what had happened with Margaret, asked if she was okay. "Just tired," she said, not meeting his eyes. But it wasn't tiredness. It was that same certainty again, that maybe she didn't belong there, that every kind gesture from Alexander, every laugh shared with Ethan, would always run into the same invisible wall, the wall of last names, of money, of two very different histories. She packed her few things into a plastic bag, ready to leave before sunrise, back to a room she couldn't even afford anymore, but Ethan found her sitting in the dark living room, bag beside her. "Are you leaving?" he asked, voice small. Grace didn't know what to say. "Lucas would have left too if someone didn't want him around," Ethan said with that simple kid logic. "But you do want me. I know it. So why are you leaving?" Those words, said with no intention to hurt, were what finally broke through to Grace. She stayed. When Alexander found out the next day what happened with Margaret and what Grace had almost done, he didn't make excuses. "My mother-in-law's scared," he told her honestly. "Scared I'm replacing my wife, that Ethan's losing his place in the family. But that's not what's happening, Grace, and I'm not going to let anyone make you feel like you don't belong here. Not her, not anybody." Grace looked at him, still unsure. "I don't want to be a problem between you and your family, Alexander." "You're not," he said. "You're the reason my son is alive, and every day, you're also the reason I feel something again that I thought I'd lost a long time ago." Over time, things between Alexander and Grace kept shifting into something else. Alexander started finding excuses to talk to her, checking in on her beyond just the medical stuff, how she slept, if she needed anything, what she liked to eat. And one night, watching her laugh with Ethan over some dumb joke about a soccer game, it hit him, clear as day. He loved her, but that feeling came with a conflict that wasn't simple to untangle. Grace, for her part, was fighting a deep fear. She was terrified of letting herself fall for someone again, of building a new family, like it would mean replacing Lucas, betraying his memory, forgetting even a little the pain she felt she owed him as proof of her love. That fight kept her up most nights, staring at the ceiling of the room Alexander had given her, wondering if she deserved to be happy again, if she even had the right to feel something good when her son wasn't there to feel it too. One night, she dreamed about him. In the dream, Lucas sat across from her, smiling, wearing his favorite soccer jersey. "Mom," he said, "I love you so much. You were always amazing, but you have to move on and be happy. You deserve to be happy." Grace woke up crying, but for the first time in a long time, some of the weight she'd been carrying started to lift. The next day, she sat with Alexander in the backyard while Ethan kicked a ball against the wall by himself. "I had a dream about Lucas last night," she said, voice shaking. Alexander listened, quiet, not interrupting. "He told me to move on," she continued, "that I deserved to be happy." Alexander took her hand carefully, like he was holding something fragile and precious at once. "Grace," he said, "I know what I feel for you doesn't replace Lucas. Nothing could, but I want you to know that if you'll let me, I'd like to build something with you, not to fill some gap, because I actually love you." Grace looked at him, eyes full of tears, but for the first time, without the weight of guilt that had followed her for months. "I love you too, Alexander," she said finally, "and I think Lucas would be happy seeing me like this." That same afternoon, Marcus stopped by, like he'd started doing more often since Alexander began opening up again, more human, more like the friend Marcus remembered from med school before the coldness took over. Seeing Grace and Alexander holding hands in the yard, Marcus smiled, genuinely moved. "Good to see you like this, Alex," he said later, over coffee in the kitchen. "The brilliant doctor I knew years ago, just with the heart he'd lost somewhere along the way." Alexander nodded, thoughtful. "I learned something important, Marcus," he said. "A doctor can never let his own pain or fear get in the way, can never turn someone away, because 1 second could be the difference between life and death. I forgot that day at the worst possible time. I'll never fully forgive myself for it, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure I never do it again." Marcus nodded quietly, understanding the weight of those words. "You know," he said after a moment, "when I took you to that room that day, I didn't know what was going to happen. I just thought you deserved to meet the person who saved your son. Never imagined she'd end up saving you too." As the months passed, Alexander and Grace's relationship grew stronger. Ethan, who'd lost his birth mother as a baby, found in Grace a kind of love he'd never quite had words for, somewhere between a mother and an older friend who always had time to listen. And Grace, without ever replacing Lucas's place in her heart, found in Ethan one more reason to keep healing, to keep moving forward. One evening, over dinner, Alexander looked at Grace with an idea he'd been building quietly for weeks. "I want to open a clinic," he told her. "A free clinic for people who can't afford private care in the same neighborhood you grew up in. I want to name it after Lucas." Grace looked at him, stunned, eyes filling with tears. "You don't have to do that for me, Alexander. I'm not doing it just for you," he said, sincere. "I'm doing it because Lucas, without ever meeting me, taught me the most important lesson of my life. And I want his name to keep helping people, the same way you helped my son." Marcus, hearing about the project soon after, immediately offered to run the medical side of the new clinic, without anyone asking. "This isn't just your project, Alex," he told him, voice full of emotion. "It's something we all get to build together, for Lucas and for Grace, to remind us why we got into this in the first place." The months that followed were non-stop work. Alexander put a big chunk of his savings into the construction on a small lot in the same neighborhood where Grace had spent her whole life, close to the corner where she used to sell tamales with Lucas by her side. The neighbors, once they found out what the place was for, pitched in however they could. Miss Loretta, the same neighbor who'd been so suspicious of Alexander at first, was one of the first to volunteer, hauling buckets of water for the construction crew, telling anyone who'd listened that finally, somebody was doing something good for the block. Another neighbor lent tools. A group of teenagers cleared the lot on weekends, hauling debris and sweeping up dust in the afternoon sun. Grace, fully recovered by now, was involved in every detail, picking paint colors, going over lists of basic medications that would be given out free, talking to families in the neighborhood, telling them a place was coming where they could get care without fearing an impossible bill. Halfway through construction, money started running short. Medical equipment cost more than expected, and Alexander, without telling anyone, almost sold his late wife's car, parked in the garage for years, just to make up the difference. Grace found out from Marcus and confronted him that night. "You can't sell that car," she told him firm. "It's the one thing Ethan has left of her. We'll figure out another way. Between the two of them, and with Marcus convincing a couple of medical suppliers to donate used equipment in good condition, they pulled together what they needed without Alexander having to give up that piece of Ethan's history. "Thank you for not letting me make that mistake," Alexander told her that same night, going over the last details of the build. "That's what I'm here for," Grace said, tired but smiling for real. "Somebody's got to keep you from doing something stupid when nobody's looking." One afternoon, with construction nearly finished, they were painting the front of the building together when Grace stopped, brush still in hand, and looked at Alexander. "I never thought something good could come out of that day," she said quietly. "The day you left me on the floor." Alexander looked down, still carrying that shame that never fully left him. "Neither did I," he said. "But I'm glad somehow that day is what brought you into my life, even though I'd rather have never hurt you to get here." Grace smiled, and for the first time, touched his cheek with a tenderness she no longer feared showing. "The past can't change, Alexander, but you changed, and that's all that matters now." One afternoon, as Grace left the stationery shop after her shift, a man was waiting outside, leaning against the wall, cap pulled low over his face. "Grace," he said, voice unsure. "It's me, Derek." Grace froze. It was Lucas's father, the same man who'd walked out on her, pregnant, 8 years ago, without leaving so much as an address. "What do you want?" she asked, a coldness in her voice she didn't know she still had. "I heard about Lucas," he said, looking down, "and I heard you're living with some doctor now, that they're even naming a clinic after my son. Came to see if I could be part of that too. He was my son too, after all." Grace felt a wave of anger and sadness she didn't expect. "Your son died never knowing you," she said, voice shaking but firm. "And now that something good came out of that loss, you show up?" Derek didn't have an answer. That night, Grace told Alexander everything, hands still shaking. "I don't know if he actually wants to make things right, or if he just wants to be near something that has value now," she said honestly, "and I don't know which one's worse." Alexander listened without telling her what to do. "Whatever he wants," he said finally, "it's your call, not mine, not anyone else's. You're the one who carried everything. You're the one who decides if there's room for him in what we're building." In the weeks that followed, while the clinic kept taking shape, Grace carried that question quietly, in no hurry to answer it. Some days she thought about shutting the door on him for good. Other days she wondered if Lucas would have wanted her to at least hear him out. Finally, with the clinic's opening just days away, she agreed to meet Derek one last time, not to forgive him, but to lay things out clearly before closing that chapter for good. "You can come to the clinic opening like anybody else from the neighborhood," she told him, "but you're not going to be part of Ethan's life or mine. Lucas forgave you in his own way, dying without any bitterness in his heart. I'm still working on that. I won't stop you from honoring his memory from a distance, but I'm not giving you a place you didn't earn." Derek nodded quietly and left that afternoon without pushing further. Grace never found out if his intentions had been sincere or not, and for the first time she realized she didn't need to know to move forward. Months later, on a crisp spring morning, sun cutting through the last of a Chicago winter, the Lucas Bennett Free Clinic opened its doors on that same South Side block, a small building offering free care to families who, like Grace once, had nowhere else to turn. At the entrance, a plaque with the boy's name greeted every patient who walked in, next to a simple photo Grace had kept for years, the only one she had of her son, smiling, soccer ball tucked under his arm. Among the people who came by that morning to see the new building, Grace spotted a familiar face in the distance. Derek stood at the back, cap in hand, looking at the plaque with his son's name without approaching anyone. He stayed only a few minutes in silence and left before the ceremony began. Grace watched him go and felt for the first time that there was no more anger or fear left in that part of her story, just peace. Even Margaret, Alexander's late wife's mother, showed up for the opening. She approached Grace, clearly uncomfortable, but with something different in her eyes. "My daughter would have wanted Ethan to have a whole family," she said quietly. "I think I finally understand you didn't come here to take anything away. You came to give it all back." Grace moved, squeezed her hand in silence. That same day, in a nearby garden, decorated with simple flowers and folding chairs borrowed from neighbors, Alexander and Grace got married, surrounded by the small but real group of people who made up their new family. Ethan, in a little suit, he insisted on picking out himself. Diane, the social worker, unable to hold back tears watching the ending of a story she'd helped begin. Miss Loretta, in her best dress, saved for special occasions. And Marcus, who couldn't hold back his tears either, watching his best friend finally whole. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan ran and hugged them both at once, laughing with the kind of joy only a kid who's finally found a complete home can have. Someone put on music from a small borrowed speaker. The neighbors clapped. Miss Loretta cried openly, wiping her tears with the edge of her shawl, muttering that she always knew that Doctor had a good heart under all that coldness. Marcus raised a plastic cup of lemonade, because that's all there was in that simple backyard, and toasted his friends, voice breaking with emotion. "To second chances," he said, "and to the people brave enough to take them." Grace looked up at the sky for a moment, a peaceful smile on her face. "Thank you, Lucas," she whispered, quiet, just for her and the wind. "Thank you for giving me a second chance to love." And that's how what started as an act of indifference in a hospital hallway turned into the story of a second chance. For a boy who survived, for a mother who learned to keep living, and for a man who discovered, too late to avoid the pain, but just in time to change, that real medicine always starts with the heart. And now I want to ask you something. You who made it all the way to the end of this story. On a scale from 0 to 10, what would you rate this story? Let me know in the comments. And if this story moved you, don't forget to share it with someone who needs the reminder that there's always a second chance waiting at the end of the road.